Hey everybody, I want to spend some time today going through a question from Enterprise DNA member Lucas. And it's an interesting question in and of itself, but the reason I want to spend some time dissecting it today is it also touches on a whole bunch of other interesting topics, including disconnected tables, slicer harvesting and some slicer visualization tricks, conditional formatting, and virtual tables. So there's a lot bundled up in this, even though on the face of it, it's not a particularly complex question. So what he wanted to do was he had a table, and based on the value of a slicer, so in this case, he wants to set the slicer at May 1st. He wants to take every record that is less than or equal to the slicer value and date in, and every record that's greater than the slicer value and date out, and reduce the table just to those records. And so in doing that, if we take, and before we do that, let's actually take a quick look at our data model. So it's quite simple. We can blow this up a little bit. We've basically just got Melissa DeCourte's extended date table, and that's tied to our fact table just through the active relationship between date and date in, and inactive relationship between date and date out. And then we've just got our measures table. So very simple data model we're working with today. And so what we can do is if we start out and slice the data as he was talking about, we just take our date field and turn that into a slicer, and we'll select, actually we want a single value, so we'll turn that for now into a list. And that's not a great user experience because we've got to now kind of hunt through the list for May 1st, but we'll get into that in a minute. So we'll scroll down here and find May 1st. And you can see why this is not a great way to do it through the list, but we select May 1st. And now we see some problems with that right off the bat. That it's a blunt instrument, and we've got a more refined condition that we're trying to reach. So it basically takes out everything that's not date in May 1st, which is not what we want. Plus it also filters these two visuals in a way that's not very useful. So we can tell right off the bat that a straight up slicer is not going to work for us. And so what we want instead is a disconnected table. And that is a great technique to use when really what you want to do is harvest the value out of that, what looks like a slicer to the user, but isn't actually interacting with your visuals. And you're just pulling that value into your DAX and then using that to manipulate your calculations in your visuals. So let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this useless slicer, and we'll just take that and remove it. And now what we need to do is create a disconnected table. And I recently did a video on the 3 types of tables in Power BI, and I'll put a reference to that in the notes section on the YouTube video. But this was the bottom line, is that there are 3 types of tables: physical, calculated, and virtual. And to create a disconnected table, you can do it either as a physical table in Power Query or as a calculated table in DAX. And I think the optimal way to do this would be as a physical table. But for the sake of time today, I'm just going to go ahead and create it as a virtual calculated, not as a virtual table, as a calculated table in DAX, just by going to Modeling, New Table. And then the way we'll do that is just through the use of the values function in DAX. And so our disconnected date table is going to equal values of the date from our date table. And that's just going to create a 1-column disconnected table. We can just hit return on that, and we'll see over here that's exactly what that does. It just creates a 1-column virtual table, a 1-column calculated table. And now what we can do is we can pull that value in as our slicer. And let's now take the time to give a good user experience here. So instead of a list, what we'd ultimately like to do is have a single value slider. And unfortunately, there's not anything like that in the regular choices. The only way you get a single value slider is generate series, and that's not something we can do with dates. What we can do is we can do after. And after gives us what looks like a single value slider, but in fact is giving us everything from the date of the slider and all the dates subsequent to that. Now, one of the tricky things about an after slicer is how you harvest it. And so if we go to our key measures here, let's create a harvest measure. And the typical harvest measure that we use, let's just go up here. So we've got a measure, we'll call it harvest. And the typical harvest measure is based on selected value. And so selected value of our disconnected date field. And now if we hit return on that, it doesn't produce an error. But if we go and then we drop that into a card and take a look at it, make that a card, we'll see it shows blank. And the reason for that is that selected value has to return a single value, and the after slicer returns multiple values. It returns everything from the initial date here, 6/11, all the way to the end of the slider, so 12/31. And so because it doesn't return a single value, it's going to harvest as blank. So we need to take that and alter that measure. So instead what we can do, we can take this and we can say calculate, and then we can take the minimum value of our disconnected slicer, our disconnected date here. And now the change in context that we're going to want is basically all selected. So basically it's the minimum of everything that is selected in the after slicer. So we take that and we go to our disconnected date field again, and we close that off and hit return. And now we're getting exactly what we want, which is we're getting the single value out of harvest. And now what we've got is a nice user experience, because not only can we slide, we can go up here and we can take advantage of this date picker. So if we want May 1st, we can just select it right on the date picker and it shows up as a single value. So we're off to the races. We can get rid of this knowing that this is working right. And now what we need to do is we need to create a measure that is going to use that harvested value to filter our table. So let's do that. And we'll call this measure within range. And Lucas, when he was talking about this problem, said he started trying to filter based on tables. And so, given we've been talking a little bit about virtual tables, let's start off trying that. So let's start off with a variable, and we'll make this our virtual table, vtable. And we know from DAX that filter is just a table. So why don't we try filter? And then what we want to do is we want to filter our data table. And the conditions that we want to use is basically the date in is less than or equal to our harvest value. And we can now set the compound condition, and we want date out is going to be greater than the harvest condition. So now we've got a virtual table that filters down to the records we want. Okay, so now we have to return a value. And now all of a sudden, we may realize we've painted ourselves into a corner. That we've got a virtual table. This table does exactly what we want it to do. But now the problem is a measure can't return a table. A measure has to return a scalar. So we're stuck here in that there's no way we can get this table to return as a scalar. So let's think about how we can change this. So what we can do instead is let's make this condition 1. Or let's make a condition, because we've got multiple conditions in here. And let's take out this filter. And let's instead change that to an if. Because what we really want here is not necessarily the whole table. We just want a measure that says, does it meet that compound condition or not? So if we take the if, and now, because it's not within a filter, we just need to add selected value around the date in and date out. So let's do that. And sometimes you've got to go back in and reselect this. There we go. So now it's given us the proper value, and we do the same here. Selected value, and let's select date out. Close that off. Okay, and now what we want is comma after this, and we want it to be 1 if that condition is true and 0 if it's false. Oh, and what we've got to do is we've got to return condition here. So now we just hit return, and we've got a measure that does exactly what we want. It just returns 1 if it's within the range and 0 if it's not. So what we can now do is just go to the filter pane, and then for this visual, let's just select the visual and take our within range measure and drop that into the filter pane, and then just set that such that when the value is 1, it shows the items. And we just need to hit apply, and we can see that's giving us exactly what we want, C, D, and E, and it's not filtering either of these. But now what we can do is we can extend this even a bit further, in that we can take these, and now through the use of conditional formatting, we can leverage this measure even further. So let's take this and go down to data colors, and in our default color, let's change that to conditional formatting, on rules, and then we'll base that on our within range measure. And here we go, within range, and we'll set a rule that if the value is 1, and we just change that to a number, then we'll change this to, let's pick a color here, and we've got that changing dynamically. And we can do the same with our scatter chart. We just come in here to data colors, and again go default color and set up the exact same rule structure that we set up for our bar chart. Key measures, within range, set that equal to, set that equal to 1. And we'll use the same color that we used on the bar chart. And now we've got a completely dynamic structure here. So we can basically slide this around, and it changes our bars as we go in all the visuals in exactly the way that Lucas had wanted to, in terms of filtering the table down to the correct values. So hope that's helpful. Hope you picked up some useful tips along the way. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Enterprise DNA TV. If you enjoyed the content covered in this particular tutorial, please throw the video a like. It really helps us and we really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Enterprise DNA TV channel. We have a huge amount of content coming out all the time from myself and a range of content creators, all dedicated to improving the way that you use Power BI and the Power Platform. Lastly, check out Enterprise DNA's website. Plenty of resources and further learning that you can access very easily. All the best. Take care.